for a second, finding out that the news article you just read, one that really moved you, that offered this incredibly nuanced, empathetic take on some global crisis. Imagine discovering that it was entirely generated by a machine.
Right.
And worse, imagine discovering that, according to the latest research, because the text felt so human, you actually trusted it more than if a real breathing journalist had written it.
Which is a terrifying thought, honestly.
It really is. Welcome to the deep dive. If you're joining us today, you're likely someone who wants to cut through the relentless noise, the utopian promises on one side and the apocalyptic doom scrolling on the other regarding artificial intelligence. You're looking for the actual signal.
Yeah, and that signal is usually buried under layers of corporate marketing.
Exactly. So today, you're going to find it. We have gathered this massive, highly concentrated stack of 15 recent academic papers. We're talking rigorous literature reviews, strategic organizational analyses. We're pulling from fields as diverse as psychiatry, public policy, hospitality, higher education.
The whole spectrum, basically.
The whole spectrum. The mission here isn't just to catalog what these new models can do. We are going to synthesize this mountain of peer-reviewed data to figure out the underlying mechanism of this shift. How is this technology fundamentally rewiring our institutions, the way we work, and honestly, our own minds?
And I think the approach we're taking with these sources is vital to state right up front. We are treating AI not as a shiny, isolated software tool, but as a socio-technical force.
A socio-technical force.
Right. We're going to explore the severe tension between techno-optimism and techno-fear, and why the current corporate obsession with simply being quote-unquote AI ready is structurally flawed.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our roadmap today is pretty extensive. We'll start by looking at the macro shift from generative models to autonomous agentic systems.
Right, which is the foundational change.
Then we follow the thread to human epistemology. Basically, how these agents are altering our trust in the news and the gold standard of scientific peer review.
And from there, we have to look at the institutional fallout. Like, if the nature of truth is shifting, how does that rewire higher education?
Right.
Or healthcare?
Yeah.
We will also put a massive magnifying glass on the global tourism industry, using it as a microcosm for this collision between human authenticity and algorithmic efficiency.
And finally, zooming out to the governance level, how public institutions must navigate this so they don't just outsource their moral responsibilities to, mathematics.
It's a vast journey, but the causal through line is incredibly clear. Every single one of these distinct fields is reacting to the exact same underlying structural earthquake. So to understand that earthquake, we have to establish what we're actually dealing with today, because the sources make it abundantly clear that the era of the passive chatbot, the system that just sits there waiting for your prompt, that's already obsolete.
Totally obsolete. We really need to turn to the 2025 analysis by Horniak for this. Horniak documents the macro business shift from generative AI to agentic AI.
Agentic AI. Yeah. And he identifies 3 core architectural differences that actually define an agentic system.
Okay, what's the first one?
First is a vastly higher level of autonomy. The system is no longer just a reactive answering machine.
Right.
Second is a capacity for what is termed tool calling or tool use.
Okay, that sounds important.
It is. And third, which is a direct consequence of the first two, is a significantly reduced requirement for human oversight.
Let's drill into that second point, the tool calling.
Yeah.
Because that feels like the real pivot point.
Oh, absolutely.
Like a generative model writes some code for you,
yeah,
and you copy and paste it.
Right, you do the work.
Yeah, but an agentic model writes the code, realizes it needs to test the code, autonomously opens a compiler, runs it, identifies a syntax error, rewrites the code, and deploys it to a server. And it does all of this while you were literally getting a cup of coffee.
Exactly. It completely bridges the gap between just generating language and actually taking action in a digital environment.
Exactly.
Yes. And exactly how this plays out is detailed in Horniak's discussion of Sam Altman's concept of the gentle singularity.
The gentle singularity. Because usually when we hear the word singularity, we picture this hard, violent, technological event horizon, right?
Yeah, the sci-fi explosion of superintelligence taking over the world.
Exactly. So what makes it gentle?
Horniak unpacks this gentle concept to describe a smooth, progressive integration. The machine doesn't just wake up one day and announce it's in charge. Instead, it slowly starts breaking down high-level goals into subtasks.
Okay, give me an example of that.
Well, it creates this seamless evaporation of the human-machine boundary. Say you ask a system to optimize my cloud storage costs.
Yeah.
The agentic system delegates that high-level abstract goal into dozens of microtasks, analyzing current server loads, predicting future traffic patterns, negotiating API costs with vendors, migrating the data. It literally delegates tasks to sub-agents.
Oh, wow. So it's managing its own little team of bots.
Exactly. The paper highlights several active deployments of this, like Capital One's automotive advisor. It doesn't just calculate interest rates, it autonomously plans out complex financing scenarios based on live market data.
Right.
Or consider Databricks AgentBricks or Google's Joules. These are systems orchestrating multi-step execution environments.
But let me push back on the architecture of that multi-step execution for a second.
Sure.
If an agent is acting on its own, spinning up sub-agents, breaking down a massive goal into a, say, 50-step sequential plan, aren't we essentially just building a massive automated error compounding machine?
How do you mean?
Well, think about building a house. If your foundation is cored off by just one single degree, you might not notice it on the first floor.
Right.
But by the time you're framing the roof, the entire structure is completely compromised and it just collapses. So if an AI makes a tiny logical hallucination, step 2 of a 50-step plan, doesn't that tiny error snowball and catastrophically ruin the final action?
That is the exact central caveat that Horniak raises regarding fully autonomous deployment.
Oh, really?
Yeah. As task complexity scales, the risk of compounding errors scales exponentially.
That makes total sense.
We are at a stage where the AI can confidently execute a sophisticated plan, but if the foundational logic or the initial data retrieval is even slightly skewed, the system will confidently and rapidly execute a disaster.
It'll just confidently build a crooked house.
Exactly. And this is why full closed-loop automation in critical infrastructure, medical triaging, or high-level algorithmic trading remains highly constrained. The Turing test is no longer the relevant benchmark.
Because we don't care if it sounds human anymore.
Right. We are testing if it sounds human. We are testing if it can act reliably in a complex environment without burning down the house.
Which transitions us directly into the organizational strategy side. Because if you are a business leader looking at this technology, you're caught in a bind.
A massive bind.
You can't ignore it, or your competitors will crush you with sheer efficiency.
Yeah.
But you also can't just hand over the keys to an agentic system that might compound an error and bankrupt you overnight.
Precisely. And that's where Davenport and Middle's 2023 framework on the AI-fueled organization comes in. It provides the blueprint for how companies are navigating this tightrope.
Okay, so what is an AI-fueled organization?
Well, Davenport and Middle make a vital distinction right away. Success is not defined by procurement.
Meaning you can't just buy your way in.
Right. Buying a massive enterprise license for an LLM does not make you an innovative company. Becoming an AI-fueled organization requires embedding the technology at scale across the entire operational architecture.
Okay.
It requires a baseline of high AI literacy from the C-suite all the way down to the frontline workers. And fundamentally, it requires the continuous real-time ingestion and analysis of massive proprietary data assets.
So they break this transformation down into 3 strategic archetypes, right?
Yes. The first is creating entirely new products or business models that simply couldn't exist without AI.
Stuff that was impossible before.
Exactly. The second is transforming core day-to-day operations, the internal plumbing of the company. And the third is using algorithmic insights to actively influence customer behavior.
And the examples they provide really anchor these archetypes in reality.
Yeah.
Like Kroger, the grocery chain.
Right.
They aren't just using AI to answer customer service emails. They're using deeply integrated predictive models to analyze highly granular, hyperlocal variables.
Like weather patterns.
Yeah, weather patterns, local sporting events, historical purchasing data. And they use all that to execute demand forecasting and individual personalization at a massive scale.
Which is incredible. And Toyota is deploying it to fundamentally alter the physics of their manufacturing operations and supply chain logistics.
Wow.
Morgan Stanley is integrating it into the core of their wealth management, using algorithms to parse complex risk portfolios and suggest client interactions. They are treating the AI as an active participant in their strategic nervous system.
Davenport and Middle proposed this maturity continuum for this shift. At the top, you have the AI-fueled leaders who have achieved this integration.
The ones who get it.
Yeah. And below them are the transformers, companies that are actively tearing down their legacy systems to rebuild around AI.
Right.
Further down are the path seekers,
right,
who are running isolated pilot programs in a single department, but lack enterprise-wide scale.
And at the very bottom are the underachievers.
Right. So if you are listening to this right now, consider your own organizational environment.
Yeah.
Does your leadership view AI as just another software update? Or are they actively rewiring the company's DNA? Because the research suggests that as we move deeper into this era of agentic AI, those underachievers will simply cease to be viable entities.
They'll just disappear. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the transition from generative to agentic forces a total reevaluation of trust.
How so?
Well, if an autonomous agent is compiling research, drafting code, or writing a market analysis, the end user is removed from the process of creation.
Right, you're just looking at the final product.
Exactly. The human is only evaluating the final output. This creates a profound epistemological crisis. How do we construct, verify, and trust knowledge when the origin of that knowledge is a black box?
Man, that brings us right to section 2, epistemology in the age of AI. Because if we are losing our ability to verify the origin of information, we have to look at the psychological mechanisms of how we assign trust in the first place.
Which is fascinating.
It really is. Li, Shang, and Begg conducted this brilliant experimental study on AI and journalism that perfectly isolates this problem. They basically wanted to understand how readers perceive and trust news content generated by artificial intelligence.
And the experimental design here is what makes this study so revealing. They manipulated 2 independent variables.
Okay, what were they?
The first was the explicit label, whether the article prominently displayed a disclosure stating written by AI or not.
Just a clear warning label.
Exactly. The second variable was what they termed perceived human likeness.
Perceived human likeness.
Yeah. This measures the linguistic fluency, the emotional cadence, the syntactic variation. Essentially, how natural and stylistically human the text actually felt to the reader.
So they were basically testing our stated conscious values against our unconscious psychological reaction.
Yes.
Because you would assume, logically, that if a reader sees a giant warning label that says, this news article was written by an algorithm, they would immediately raise their guard.
Wait, you'd think they'd approach the text with high skepticism and rate it as less trustworthy.
But the finding was entirely counterintuitive.
Completely. The linguistic presentation completely overpowered the conscious knowledge of the source. The researchers found that readers placed significantly more weight on how human the text felt, rather than the explicit label.
Wait, really? Even if they knew it was an AI?
Even if they knew. When the text exhibited high perceived human likeness, when it flowed with nuance, professional authority, and appropriate emotional tone, readers rated it as highly trustworthy and credible. The aesthetic quality of the writing overrode their skepticism about the non-human origin.
The analogy that comes to my mind is discovering that your favorite artisanal bakery, the one with the perfect sourdough crust, finding out it's actually run by a fully automated robotic assembly line in the back room.
Yeah.
If the bread tastes absolutely incredible, do you still care that a machine made it?
For a lot of people, the answer is just no. The output is all that matters.
Right. But news isn't bread. News shapes our reality. And the researchers pointed out a massive ethical dilemma here.
They really did. They identified that when highly human-like text is paired with an explicit AI label, it triggers this psychological dissonance in the reader. It generates a latent feeling of deception.
A feeling of deception.
Yeah. The reader is absorbing nuance, perhaps even simulated empathy from an entity they know is mathematically incapable of experiencing human emotion.
Right.
It creates a crisis for media transparency. The algorithm can perfectly simulate the aesthetic markers of journalistic integrity. If the simulation of integrity is indistinguishable from actual integrity, how does a democratic society evaluate its information sources?
That is wild. If we are that easily swayed by the stylistic fluency of a public news article, it puts a terrifying spotlight on the institutions responsible for validating deep, objective truth.
Oh, definitely.
Which means we are talking about scientific peer review, the mechanism that determines what medical treatments are safe, what structural engineering models are sound, what sociological theories are valid. Guré's research on AI in academic peer review dives into this exact tension.
Right. Guré surveyed the perceptions of active researchers regarding the integration of AI as the participant in the peer review process.
And what did they find?
The consensus is best described as cautious optimism constrained by strict boundaries.
Cautious optimism. Okay.
Yeah, because the academic system is buckling under the weight of editorial burnout. Reviewers are overwhelmed. Consequently, researchers are highly receptive to outsourcing the mechanical grunt work to AI.
I mean, I get that. The AI is perfectly suited to check for plagiarism, ensure formatting compliance, Flag statistical inconsistencies in large data sets, check the language. That offloads a massive burden.
It does.
But the core concern, and this is where the epistemological crisis hits the scientific method, is the AI's ability to evaluate novelty. The participants in Giray's study loudly doubted the algorithm's capacity to judge what they called methodological creativity.
And consider what methodological creativity actually requires. It requires a researcher to look at a historical scientific problem, realize that the standard accepted way of measuring it is fundamentally flawed, and invent a completely novel framework.
Right.
An AI model is, by its very architecture, a normative engine. It is trained on historical data. It maps probabilities based on what has been previously published and accepted.
So it mathematically favors the mean. It enforces the status quo.
Precisely. The deep fear is algorithmic bias resulting in the loss of normative human judgment. Researchers are terrified that an AI peer reviewer would reject a brilliant, unconventional, paradigm-shifting paper simply because its methodology doesn't map onto the historical pattern of what a good paper looks like.
Wow.
It could stifle scientific revolution by penalizing deviation from the norm.
This is why Giray's study emphasizes that a human-in-the-loop requirement is strictly non-negotiable.
Absolutely.
The AI can process the structural integrity of the data, sure, but it cannot replace the epistemological weight of human peer review. The AI is a tool, not an autonomous judge of scientific truth. And the participants insisted that transparency, openly declaring when an AI was used to evaluate a submission, is absolutely vital for maintaining that fragile trust within the academic community.
Which is so important, because if the very foundations of how we trust news and validate scientific research are actively shifting, it places immense immediate pressure on the institutions responsible for training the next generation of minds.
Which brings us to Section 3, rewiring education and research frameworks. Universities are facing a crisis of assessment right now. How do you grade a student's original thought when the tools they use are designed to obscure the origin of that thought?
Smith and colleagues published a vital 2025 paper analyzing how institutions are desperately trying to build frameworks to handle this. They looked at the institutional responses of two major universities, Macquarie University and Queensland University of Technology, or QUT.
Okay, in Australia.
Yes. What stands out immediately in their analysis is the recognition that strict prohibition is a total fantasy.
You just can't ban it.
Right. Banning generative or agentic AI in a university setting is technologically unpoliceable. The detection software is notoriously unreliable. It frequently generates false positives that accuse innocent students.
Oh man, I've heard horror stories about that.
It's awful. And it often penalizes non-native English speakers whose syntax just happens to align with algorithmic patterns.
That's terrible.
Recognizing this, Macquarie and QUT abandoned the prohibition model. They shifted to principle-based, highly flexible institutional stances centered on research integrity, transparency, and accountability.
So they built this 4-layered framework, right?
Yep.
Context, development, implementation, and review. Mm-hmm. The goal is to build a culture of responsible, transparent use rather than this feudal surveillance state. But within this framework, the Smith paper highlights a fascinating contradiction: the dual identity of PhD students.
This part is so interesting.
Right. A PhD candidate exists in this liminal space. On one hand, they're a student, subject to academic integrity rules that say you must do your own work to demonstrate mastery.
Right.
But on the other hand, they're a professional researcher, operating in a highly competitive global landscape where utilizing the most advanced data synthesis tools is basically mandatory.
The contradiction is profound. You are simultaneously assessing the student's capacity for original, independent thought while requiring them to use tools that synthetically generate and shape thought.
Yeah.
The Smith paper concludes that resolving this tension places a massive, unprecedented burden on academic mentors. The era of a professor simply reading a student's final draft and giving it a grade is completely over.
So what do they have to do instead?
It requires a model of active supervision. Mentors must actively engage with the student's entire workflow. They have to interrogate how the student prompted the AI, how they verified the algorithmic outputs, and crucially, where the student's own critical judgment overrode the machine's suggestions.
That is an incredible amount of extra cognitive labor for the faculty.
Huge.
That principle-based bottom-up approach is the Australian model.
No.
But we have to contrast that with the macro perspective offered in the 2026 study by Gu, Chan, Song, and Shi, because they examine China's model for digital transformation in higher education, specifically focusing on tourism and hospitality programs.
Right.
The Chinese approach is a massive top-down, heavily policy-driven mandate.
And the researchers traced this national evolution through 3 distinct historical phases.
Let's walk through those.
Phase 1 was exploration, spanning 2012 to 2018. The focus was heavily infrastructural, laying fiber optics, outfitting classrooms with hardware, migrating basic resources online. AI was present, but merely as a supplementary peripheral tool.
Okay, so just getting the plumbing in place.
Exactly. Phase 2 was diffusion, from 2019 to 2022. Now, this phase didn't happen by choice. It was violently accelerated by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Right, everyone had to go online.
Hybrid learning environments and digital collaboration tools transformed overnight from theoretical pilot programs into mandatory survival mechanisms for the entire educational system.
And currently we're in phase 3, which they call deep integration, running from 2023 onward.
Yes.
This is the era of embedding large language models and highly sophisticated virtual simulation environments directly into the core curriculum. The policy dictates this paradigm of human-machine collaboration in the classroom. However, the study provides a pretty critical reality check.
Very critical.
Despite the sweeping centralized mandates, the actual implementation on the ground faces severe structural friction.
The paper outlines several of these deep structural challenges. The most glaring is that the conceptual rhetoric at the policy level completely outpaces the actual pedagogical practice.
But the ideas are too big for the classroom.
Right. The central government mandates deep AI integration, but the local institutions have no idea what that practically looks like in a Tuesday morning lecture.
Makes sense.
You also have a violent clash between traditional, highly rigid educational management systems, which rely on standardized testing and semester-long arcs, and the dynamic, instantaneous nature of AI knowledge generation.
But the most disruptive challenge they identify is the digital skill gap. And this is a fascinating inversion of the traditional power dynamic.
Oh, it really is.
It is not that the students are struggling to adapt to the technology. It is that the students are often vastly more digitally native and adept at utilizing these agentic tools than the faculty who are supposed to be teaching and evaluating them.
Which is a huge problem.
Yeah. When the student understands the mechanism of the tool better than the authority figure grading the output, it creates a total crisis of legitimacy within the classroom.
So if the policy is too abstract and the teachers are overwhelmed, how does an educator actually bridge that gap? How do you teach AI literacy effectively? Dingus and Black tackled this in their 2021 study. They moved away from high-level policy and focused on a specific, hands-on pedagogical exercise in a marketing classroom. They aimed to bridge the digital divide by making the AI experiential rather than theoretical.
Okay, I remember reading about this. They deployed this very elegant exercise using IBM Watson's tone analyzer. Instead of having students read about natural language processing, they basically forced them to negotiate with it. The students were tasked with writing a piece of marketing copy. They would run their text through the AI, which would analyze the language and output a metric. For example, indicating the text was 60% analytical and 40% joyful.
Right.
But the assignment required the student to hit a very specific predetermined target tone, like highly confident and urgent.
So the student has to rewrite the text, change their vocabulary, alter their sentence structure, and feed it back into the machine until the algorithm confirms they hit the target.
Right.
The data showed that students revised their texts an average of 3 times to appease the AI. It forced an active, iterative loop. They learned how the algorithm thinks by repeatedly failing its assessment.
See, I have a massive problem with the underlying premise of this exercise.
Why is that?
Who decides what the mathematical definition of joy or confidence is if we are requiring students to repeatedly rewrite their own authentic human thoughts until an IBM algorithm says, yes, your human expression is now correct? Aren't we just teaching them to conform to a corporate algorithm's flattened idea of human communication?
You think it's standardizing them?
We're literally training human beings to sound more like machines so the machines will grade them better.
Your critique aligns perfectly with the ethical gap the researchers themselves highlight in the study.
Oh, they caught that too?
Oh, yeah. The exercise is highly effective for technical familiarization, but it carries a massive risk regarding the loss of linguistic nuance, cultural context, and authentic voice. Algorithms are trained on massive data sets that inherently reflect the dominant, often corporate, Western standard of English.
So it penalizes anything outside that standard.
Exactly. They will mathematically penalize dialect, regional slang, or culturally specific patterns of communication. If we use AI as the ultimate arbiter of effective tone, we risk flattening the rich diversity of human expression into a standardized algorithmic average.
That is a chilling thought, honestly. We've seen how AI evaluates our public news, our scientific research, our students' writing. Now, we are going to look at how it evaluates us on a much deeper level, our actual minds, our cognition, and our mental health. This brings us to section 4, the mind and the machine, examining AI in healthcare.
The socio-technical implications here become incredibly intimate. We can start by examining a proof of concept study by Serafimovska and colleagues. They investigated the viability of using conversational AI chatbots to administer cognitive assessments and dementia screenings to older adults.
The structural motivation for this is undeniable, right? We are looking at a rapidly aging global population intersecting with a severe systemic shortage of trained clinical personnel.
Exactly. The wait times for a senior to get a proper cognitive screening can stretch for months.
Which is devastating when early detection is critical. So the researchers programmed a conversational bot to verbally deliver the standard pre-structured screening questions. Things like word recall, basic math, spatial orientation tasks, and it recorded the patient's voice and text responses.
And from a purely clinical data perspective, the findings were remarkably positive. The diagnostic scores generated by the AI chatbot mapped very closely to the scores generated by human clinicians.
Oh, wow. So it actually worked.
The system proved technically capable of accurately conducting the cognitive screening.
But the clinical score isn't the whole story, is it?
No, not at all.
Because the researchers noted a massive failure at the user interface level. Older adults with low technological literacy struggled immensely with the digital medium. They were fumbling with the tablet. They didn't know when the microphone was recording. They needed the AI to repeat instructions, which it often failed to do naturally.
Right.
The medium itself caused massive latency in their responses. If you are 80 years old and taking a memory test, fumbling with a touchscreen is going to artificially inflate your response times, potentially skewing the perception of your cognitive decline.
Yeah, but the interface friction is a solvable engineering problem.
True.
But this raises an important question regarding the psychosocial dynamics of healthcare, a problem that engineering cannot easily fix. A dementia screening is an incredibly vulnerable, terrifying experience for a patient.
Absolutely terrifying.
A human clinician is constantly reading the room. They are providing eye contact, a reassuring nod, adjusting their pacing to manage the patient's anxiety. A conversational bot, no matter how flawlessly it asks the questions, cannot genuinely provide that empathetic safety net.
It loops right back to the journalism study and that latent feeling of deception we talked about. The bot might be programmed to say, "Take your time, you're doing great," in a warm voice. But the patient knows the iPad doesn't actually care if they have Alzheimer's.
It is simulated empathy.
Simulated empathy. And that distinction becomes even more critical when we broaden the scope to general psychiatric care, which is analyzed extensively in the 2025 review by Podell and colleagues.
Podell's research maps the rapidly expanding frontier of AI in mental health. They detail the use of VR and AR environments for exposure therapy in treating PTSD and severe phobias. But the most profound advancement they discuss is digital phenotyping.
Okay, we need to explain the mechanism of digital phenotyping because it sounds like science fiction, but it is happening right now.
And it's very real.
It is the use of natural language processing and machine learning to continuously analyze a patient's passive behavioral data. The algorithm tracks your typing speed on your smartphone, how frequently you use the backspace key, the slight shifts in your vocabulary from active to passive voice, combined with sleep and heart rate data from your smartwatch.
It synthesizes all these micro behaviors to predict your risk of entering a depressive episode before you consciously realize your mood is dropping.
That is mind-blowing. The potential upside of this technology is immense. It provides continuous passive monitoring rather than relying on a patient self-reporting their mood once a month during a clinical visit.
Right.
Furthermore, AI chatbots massively lower the barriers to entry for mental health triage. For individuals living in remote geographic areas with zero access to psychiatric care, or for individuals so paralyzed by social stigma that they cannot bring themselves to walk into a clinic, a conversational AI on their phone is an accessible 24/7 lifeline. It democratizes access to a baseline level of psychological support.
That's the utopian view. But the risks outlined in the paper are equally staggering. Algorithmic bias is a primary concern.
Because of the training data.
Exactly. If a diagnostic model is trained predominantly on the linguistic and behavioral data of middle-class urban populations, it might completely misinterpret the syntax or baseline behaviors of a rural or minority patient, leading to massive misdiagnoses.
Wow.
There is also the dystopian nightmare of data privacy. Who owns the continuous predictive data stream of your deepest psychological vulnerabilities?
That is a terrifying question.
And again, we hit the wall of simulated empathy. The fundamental mechanism of deep psychiatric healing relies on the genuine therapeutic alliance between two human beings.
Right.
Recognizing these severe risks, the World Health Organization has released strict ethical frameworks dictating that AI in mental health must be deployed strictly as a complementary tool. The AI can process the digital phenotype and flag risks, but it must support the human clinician. It must never be allowed to replace the human element of care.
That makes total sense. Okay, so we have touched on education, the corporate landscape, and the intimacy of healthcare. Now, I want to dive deep into one specific global industry that serves as the perfect crucible for this entire human AI collision.
Okay.
We are going to look at tourism and hospitality. Think about the core product of this industry. It isn't a physical good. It is built entirely on human connection, local authenticity, service experience. And it is actively automating those exact elements.
Tourism really is the perfect microcosm to study this socio-technical shift. Gusling and May released a highly influential 2025 assessment of AI in tourism, analyzing it through the lens of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs.
And the meta methodology of this paper is brilliant. The researchers didn't just read papers about AI. They actively used an AI chat GPT to help conduct a literature review. They wanted to test if the AI could serve as a complexity-enhancing tool to find blind spots in the human academic discourse.
And the contrast they uncovered was stark. The human-authored academic literature overwhelmingly focuses on the positive operational outcomes of AI in tourism.
Right, stuff that makes money.
Exactly. The papers celebrate increased logistical efficiency, hyper-personalization of itineraries, seamless booking algorithms, real-time language translation. The academic focus is heavily skewed toward economic growth.
But when they asked ChatGPT to analyze the systemic risks, the AI's output highlighted severe structural dangers that the academics largely glossed over.
Like what?
The AI pointed to the massive surveillance infrastructure required to track tourists, the consolidation of market power by a few monopolistic tech companies controlling the data, algorithmic routing that exacerbates over-tourism by sending millions of people to the exact same optimized locations, and the wholesale job displacement of low-skilled service workers.
Wow, this contrast perfectly illustrates why Gusling and May classify AI as a double-faced technology. It is inherently contradictory.
Double-faced. I like that.
An AI system might aggressively advance an SDG related to economic growth by maximizing a hotel chain's profit margins, while simultaneously destroying an SDG related to reducing inequality by automating away the entire front desk staff. It is not a neutral optimization tool. It involves deeply political trade-offs.
And we experience these trade-offs directly as consumers. Two papers we reviewed, one, a multi-analytic approach by Han, and a bibliometric review by Aranzia examined the evolution of conversational AI in the tourist experience.
Whoa.
We used to rely on bots just for transactional tasks, right? Like book a double room for 3 nights.
Right. But Han's analysis demonstrates that AI has evolved far beyond transactions. It is now acting as an experiential and relational actor. The AI actively co-creates the trip.
Co-creates it.
Yes. It plans the daily itinerary, acts as a personalized, location-aware guide via your smartphone, translates interactions in real time. It becomes the primary interface between the tourist and the destination.
But the fatal flaw identified in these studies is that algorithms struggle profoundly with local, cultural, and sociopolitical context. If you ask an AI for a walking tour of a historically complex, deeply layered city, it is going to aggregate the most common data points.
Right.
It is going to give you the most sanitized Wikipedia average version of that city's history. It avoids the gritty, controversial, unquantifiable elements that make a place real. It risks turning global travel into a shallow, standardized, algorithmic hallucination. You aren't experiencing Rome. You are experiencing a math equation's optimized prediction of what a tourist wants Rome to be.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. If the tourist is receiving a frictionless, sanitized, algorithmically managed experience, what is the psychological reality for the human beings working on the other side of that equation?
The staff.
Right. What happens to the people cooking the food, cleaning the rooms, and managing the logistics?
We have to look at the talent for study using scenario planning methodologies, looking forward to the year 2035. They gathered industry experts to construct 4 divergent futures for tourism workers based on AI adoption rates.
And the scenario that generated the most profound dread among the experts was termed AI overload.
AI overload.
Yeah. This envisions a future of extreme, unbridled automation. Humans are entirely pushed out of strategic or empathetic decision-making. They are relegated to subservient physical tasks dictated minute by algorithmic managers.
Sounds awful.
It results in total worker alienation and the complete de-skilling of the hospitality workforce. Conversely, the preferred scenario was AI-human harmony, a hybridized model where AI handles the frictionless data processing, allowing the human staff to focus entirely on deep, empathetic guest interactions.
But that is a projection for 2035. What is the psychological reality for workers right now? Kumar and Malhotra utilize a classic framework from organizational psychology, the SSO model, which stands for stressor, strain, and outcome, to analyze the dark side of generative AI for current hospitality employees.
They apply the SSO model to demonstrate how the rapid, opaque integration of generative AI is acting as a massive environmental stressor.
Let's ground this in a specific scenario. Imagine a mid-level manager at a large hotel. Out of nowhere, corporate headquarters deploys a new agentic AI system that autonomously handles dynamic room pricing, adjusts employee shifts based on predicted occupancy, and automatically responds to negative customer reviews.
Yeah.
The manager has no idea how the algorithm weighs variables. That new system is the massive stressor. It creates deep role ambiguity. The manager is suddenly asking, what exactly is my job now? It generates a profound fear of impending obsolescence and a complete loss of autonomous control over their own daily work environment.
And the model shows that this environmental stressor inevitably triggers the psychological strain. For the employee, this strain manifests as chronic anxiety, emotional exhaustion, and severe burnout.
Right.
The employee feels that their hard-earned human expertise has been entirely devalued by a black box algorithm.
Which logically leads to the final stage,
Yeah.
the outcome. And the outcomes are universally terrible for the organization. The highly experienced employee either quits, taking their institutional knowledge with them, or they stay. But their organizational commitment drops to absolute zero.
They just give up.
Yeah, they engage in quiet quitting, doing the bare minimum to survive. The vital insight from Kumar and Malhotra is that the root cause of this fear isn't the software code itself. The fear is a direct result of management implementing the technology blindly, focusing exclusively on rapid cost cutting, without establishing any psychological safety or ethical boundaries for the workforce.
It is fundamentally a failure of human leadership, not a technological inevitability, which brings us perfectly to our final section, overcoming optimism and fear, and the absolute imperative of public governance.
Yes.
Because whether we are analyzing the burnout of a hotel manager, the complex assessment of a PhD student, or the vulnerability of an older adult taking a cognitive test, the overarching unifying theme is how our human organizations choose to govern this technology.
We turn to a 2025 philosophical and public policy analysis by Nicola Capiloupo for this. Capiloupo argues that our current public discourse is trapped in a paralyzing false binary.
We constantly ricochet between two extremes. On one side is techno-optimism, the utopian Silicon Valley narrative that AI is a magic wand that will effortlessly optimize the economy, cure disease, and solve climate change if we just let it scale.
And the other side.
On the other side is techno-fear, the dystopian dread that AI will inexorably automate away all human purpose and eventually terminate humanity. Capiloupo argues that public institutions, governments, and regulatory bodies must reject both extremes. They must stop viewing AI as a neutral, deterministic tool that simply arrives from the future to dictate our reality.
To explain this, Capiloupo relies heavily on a foundational concept from organizational theorist Wanda Orlikowski, the duality of technology.
The duality of technology is a crucial lens. It posits that technology fundamentally shapes the structure and behavior of an organization. However, simultaneously, the culture, the biases, and the goals of the organization actively shape what the technology becomes in practice.
Okay, wait, explain that to me.
It is a continuous two-way street of influence. If a government agency decides to deploy an AI to detect welfare fraud, the mathematical parameters they choose to prioritize will fundamentally alter the nature of that government agency.
So, relying on Capiloupo's research, what is the single most urgent danger for a government or a public institution integrating AI into its workflows today?
Capiloupo introduces two critical concepts, acratism and automation bias. The greatest immediate danger is not the sci-fi trope of a superintelligence turning evil. The danger is deeply bureaucratic.
Bureaucratic.
Yeah. It is the risk that public officials, judges, and civil servants will quietly, systematically outsource their moral, legal, and political decision-making responsibilities to opaque algorithms. They do this because relying on the machine is faster, it clears the backlog, and most dangerously, it possesses the illusion of mathematical, infallible objectivity.
Oh man, it's the ultimate shield against accountability.
Yeah.
A citizen asks why their social services were denied or why their zoning permit was rejected, and the bureaucrat simply points to the screen and says, I don't know, the algorithm calculated your risk score and said no.
Exactly.
It is laundering human bias and political accountability through the sterile language of mathematics.
That is the essence of automation bias. It is the documented psychological tendency for human operators to trust the output of an automated system over their own empirical judgment, even when the system is generating visibly flawed or contradictory results. If a public institution succumbs to icratism, it hollows out its democratic soul. It replaces the messy, necessary work of human judgment with cold, algorithmic execution.
So how do organizations defend against that? Right now, every massive corporation and government agency is pouring billions of dollars into AI readiness training for their staff. They're trying to prepare for the shift.
And here, Capiloupo points out a vital structural reality. The very concept of AI readiness is a conceptual trap.
Wait, really? Why is trying to be ready a trap?
Because the technology is evolving far too rapidly. AI is not a static software program like a word processor. Any specific technical skills an employee learns today, like specific prompt engineering techniques for a current LLM, will almost certainly be rendered entirely obsolete in 6 to 12 months when the next generation of autonomous agentic models is deployed. You cannot be functionally ready for an environment that is continuously and radically shifting its own parameters.
So what is the strategic alternative? You can't just throw up your hands and surrender to the algorithm.
The alternative requires a deeper organizational philosophy. Organizations must cultivate what Jarahi termed in 2018 as socio-technical symbiosis.
Socio-technical symbiosis.
Yeah. You do not waste resources training your staff on the precise mechanics of a fleeting tool. Instead, you build a resilient culture of continuous learning, rigorous critical thinking, and rapid adaptation. You intentionally design operational workflows where the AI handles the massive high-speed data crunching, but the system architecture structurally requires a human being to apply contextual empathy, ethical oversight, and normative judgment to finalize the decision.
I see.
In a true symbiosis, the AI heavily complements human intelligence. It is explicitly forbidden from replacing human accountability.
Okay, let's take a deep breath and synthesize the massive landscape we just navigated. We started by examining the macro shift in the technology itself, moving from a passive generative tool to an autonomous agentic system capable of executing complex multi-step plans. We saw how the linguistic fluency of those agents is creating a profound epistemological crisis, altering how we assign trust to public journalism and how we validate the methodological creativity of scientific peer review.
And we unpacked the immense structural friction of integrating this technology into educational frameworks, highlighting the clash between top-down policy and the reality of a digitally native student body. We explored the nuanced, deeply human challenges of utilizing conversational bots for intimate cognitive assessments and predictive psychiatric phenotyping.
We felt the deep psychological strain of workers in the tourism industry who feel their human expertise is being devalued by algorithmic management. And we recognized how that same technology threatens to sanitize and standardize the authentic travel experience.
Right.
And ultimately, we landed on the existential necessity for our public institutions to reject the false binary of optimism and fear and actively guard against the democratic threat of automation bias.
Every single paper, regardless of the industry it analyzed, reinforced the same fundamental reality. This is a socio-technical transition. The technology will not determine our future in a vacuum. Human choices will dictate how the algorithms are applied.
And this brings the entire deep dive directly back to you listening right now. You are not a passive observer watching this technological shift from the sidelines. Whether you are leading a team through a corporate restructuring, grading a stack of university essays, reading the morning news, or simply booking your next vacation online, you are an active participant in this socio-technical symbiosis.
Absolutely.
Your engagement with these systems trains their parameters, and their outputs subtly shape your cognitive environment.
Which leads us to a final underlying thought that connects every piece of research we examine today.
Okay, what is it?
across all these diverse fields, whether we are talking about the marketing student trying to hit the right tone, the older adult seeking reassurance during a dementia test, or the tourist seeking the true soul of a foreign city, the recurring profound anxiety is the loss of human authenticity.
Well,
we are terrified of losing the true human voice in our writing, true empathy in our medical care, and genuine connection in our daily lives.
We are desperately clinging to the need for the real thing.
But I ask you to consider the findings of the AI journalism study one last time. The researchers proved that readers actually trusted the AI-generated text more when it successfully simulated the aesthetic feeling of human empathy and professional nuance.
Right.
So as these agentic models continue to iterate, if an algorithm eventually learns to mimic human warmth, insight, and empathy so flawlessly that our own neurology literally cannot detect the simulation, does the actual source of that empathy still matter? Or, as we plunge deeper into the digital age, will the perfect algorithmic illusion of human connection become enough to sustain our society?
If the automated baker produces the perfect loaf of bread, does it matter if the machine has a soul? That is a profound question to sit with. Thank you for taking this expansive deep dive with us today. Keep questioning the logic of the algorithms in your own life. Always demand to keep the human in the loop. We will catch you next time.